Thanks very much, Peter, and good morning all. I presume I need to click a button to get an image up here. Yeah, oh, there we go, one too many. I have the privilege of being here to briefly introduce you to Dr. Peter Bryan, whose image you'll see there, who was a pioneer in anaesthesia in Western Australia, in whose honour this lecture is being given. Peter was born in Lancashire in the UK and originally intended to study engineering following his secondary education. However, World War II intervened, during which time he served 4 years in the Royal Air Force. Thereafter, he chose to change tack and study medicine at Cambridge and King's College Hospital in London, managing to fit his studies in around many sporting pursuits. He completed his anaesthetics training at King's College and developed an interest in paediatric anaesthesia during that time. However, disconcerted by the changes in the NHS around then, he departed for Canada, where he did a 3-year stint as a small-town GP in Saskatchewan. Not content there and missing paediatric anaesthesia, he was appointed in 1964 as the second full-time anaesthetist at Princess Margaret Hospital in Perth. He worked there continuously over the next 25 years until his retirement in 1989. There were many challenges in anaesthesia at the time. Diagnosis and perioperative care was in the hands of physicians who regarded surgeons and anaesthetists as mere technicians. The field of intensive care was developing, with the need for prolonged intubation and ventilation clearly requiring specialists in airway management to be involved, much to the distress of the physicians. Peter was integrally involved in the development and management of paediatric intensive care at PMH, despite significant opposition which initially saw ICU patients managed throughout the general wards, where there was a variable level of expertise being involved. It wasn't until 1969 that PMH opened its intensive care unit. However, 24-hour nursing care, or specialist nursing care, was still some years away. Another of his major achievements was the establishment of the same-day surgery unit at PMH in 1974, the first in Western Australia and only the second such unit in Australia. He was also an early advocate of local anaesthesia blocks in association with general anaesthesia to provide better post-operative pain relief in paediatrics, this being particularly useful in same-day surgery. As many older local anaesthetists in the audience would remember, he was an outstanding and popular teacher who worked with rather than for surgeons. He placed great emphasis on high ethical standards in anaesthesia and medicine generally. He advocated for the status of anaesthetists, both locally and through his involvement with the ASA, where he served as federal president from 1976 to 1978. While he was still an Englishman, I might add, a fact that amused him enormously, and there are parallels there with our contemporary politicians. I quote from his presidential address from 1978. "Let us never look for status by not giving anaesthetics. Ours is the one branch of medicine that doesn't have to be justified. We are here to make sure that the individual undergoes surgery free from pain, in safety, without knowledge, yet providing the surgeon with optimal conditions for surgery." Peter gave long service on the Medical Board of Western Australia and was its president for 13 years. He was a member of the Australian Medical Council and the National Specialist Qualification Advisory Committee. He was made a Fellow of the AMA in 1989 and in 1996 was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for services to paediatric anaesthesia and intensive care. He was a great orator, delivering many pertinent quotes and amusing anecdotes during his presentations. I have clear memories of, as many of you will hear, of being entertained by his keynote address on professionalism at the 2000 NSC in Perth. Given his Canadian links, it's pertinent to consider the attributes of a professional as defined by the CanMeds framework from the Royal College of Physicians of Canada, which lists the necessary competencies for all areas of medical practice and provides a foundation for medical education and practice in Canada and now across many other countries, including our own. These attributes include being a medical expert, a professional, a communicator, a collaborator, scholar, advocate and leader. Peter was all of these things and more, a humorist, a sportsman with wide interests outside medicine. In considering this pioneer lecture, I can think of no more worthy person to honour than Peter Bryan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Richard. We come to the main part of this session now. Dr. Neville Gibbs is a special anaesthetist at the Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, Nedlands, Western Australia, and a clinical professor at the University of Western Australia. He was the chief editor of our Anesthesia and Intensive Care from 2009 to 2017 and remains an editor. He has a long history of involvement in patient safety in Australia and New Zealand, and currently is the chair of the Australian and New Zealand Tripartite Anesthesia Data Committee. I welcome to the podium Richard. I welcome to the podium Neville to present his talk on truth, the whole truth, and evidence-based medicine. Thanks, Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. And it's a real privilege to be here, and thank you very much to Dan and Dale and David for the opportunity to be involved in this particular lecture, and particularly with Peter Bryan, a man who I had the privilege of working with in the 1980s, and he was a wonderful man and a wonderful teacher, and certainly a wonderful person to be speaking about today. So I don't have any conflicts of interest, but I thought I'd just dispel this rumour right from the start. Some of you, especially from Perth, would have seen this van. And I just wanted to say that it's not me. So we've had a lot of science this week, and so I thought we'd just change tack a little bit. And I'm going to talk to you about your new car purchase. One option is if you go down to the Audi centre, well, it doesn't have to be the Audi centre. Many of you will be buying a Tesla or a Toyota. It doesn't really matter. The same principles will apply to the comments that I'll have to make about this car purchase. But you probably go with an idea of some default car that you'd like to buy, and this might be like, for argument's sake, an Audi A4, but it could be a BMW or a Holden or whatever. But once you get to the showroom, there's another car, and we're told this one's now, it looks exactly the same virtually, except it's a V6 and it's got four-wheel drive and loads of other extras. So which car should you choose? You've got to think about this carefully. This is a very important decision for you. So you're told by the but when you're talking to the salesman, you say you want a car for city driving. You're not going to be driving in the country. You just want to get to work and back, and so you don't want anything too special. But we're told by the salesperson that there's evidence to support the choice of the S4 versus the A4. So we think, okay, what is this evidence? What do we even mean by when someone says, oh, there's evidence? We hear it all the time. Oh, there's evidence for this, or there's no evidence for that. Okay, so there's this term evidence. So what does someone mean when they say evidence? Well, they could mean lots of different things. We could have, there's a hierarchy of, which you'll be familiar with systematic reviews, and then randomized controlled trials, other observational studies, case reports, all the way down to background information and expert opinion. Well, background information, expert opinion is sometimes is classified as level 5 evidence, but it is just rationale. So when we talk about evidence, we have to think about what is the level of the evidence and what is the quality of the evidence. How much bias does it have in it? Can we trust it? Is it consistent? Is it all pointing in the same direction? And is there heaps or is there very, very little? So when we hear the term evidence, when it's used alone, it's meaningless. It's almost meaningless. There's evidence, it could be tiny, it could be huge, it could be immense, we don't know. And it can be misleading because someone, if you hear the term evidence, you may automatically think naturally that there's lots, when there might be very, very little. And saying there's evidence is as informative as saying something costs money. You're no wiser at the end of it. So the truth may be that there is some evidence for this particular car purchase or for whatever you want to do, but the whole truth requires assessment of the level of the evidence, the quality of the evidence, the consistency, and the amount of the evidence. And this is quite a task. So when I say truth here, I don't want to get into philosophical issues. I'm just going to use good grounds for believing. And that's at best the closest we can come to what the meaning of truth is. And we want good grounds for believing, and much of these topics will be covered in this particular meeting, either have done or will be. You know, like we want to know, do we have good grounds for believing whether anesthesia causes cognitive decline and whether we can change it? We want to know if our choices will affect tumor recurrence or progression to chronic pain or neural development. These and many, many other questions. We want to, and these questions are much more important than choosing a car. For the person involved, whether they're going to get a tumor recurrence or whether they're going to get cognitive decline or whether they're going to progress to, that's much, much more important than our choice of a car. But anyway, so we would really like to know, when we talk about evidence, what we mean. So this is the evidence that the salesman tells us. It comes from the journal New Vehicles, and it was published earlier this year. And it's a comparison of these two. And it's an observational study. It's large numbers. It's quite well done. You've got a reasonably valid satisfaction survey. And we find out that the satisfaction was higher with the S4 than the A4. And this is statistically significant. In deference to what we've heard earlier by Michael Avedon, it's also highly significant. So are we satisfied now? We say, okay, we've done our due diligence here. We've looked at the evidence, as doesn't have to be much other. Are we now happy with our purchase because this satisfaction is higher? Is there anything else we want to know? Well, I would contend that we want to know how much higher. Is it 1%? Is it 100%? Is it 300%? Is it 2%? The p-value is not telling us what that is. So we asked the salesman saying, well, how much higher? And he said, what are you talking about? P is less than 0.05. Why do you want to know how much higher? And we often come into this issue of there is an accent on p. So what does p-value tell us about how much higher it is? Let's just have a look. A p-value is the probability of obtaining the observed result, or one more extreme, given that there's no true difference. It's a shorter definition. Nothing about size. We can also maybe say it's due to chance alone. And statistical significance is just that we decide, our choice or the author's choice, of whether the p-value is less than a preset threshold. Often it can be 0.05 commonly, but it could be much lower. And also there's this idea that this is a dichotomous, it's yes-no. Well, it's not really yes-no, because if you actually see the p-value, you can decide for yourself. You have agency. You can work out that, well, I'm going to accept a different p-value and look at the results and make my own mind up. Because all that is the false positive rate. It's in a fancy term, but that's what the false positive rate you're willing to accept. So statistical significance does not provide information on the size of a difference, and it can occur, even a very, very tiny p-value, whether if the sample is large enough or the variability is low enough. And so we always have to look separately. There's an undue focus on significance. Often we would, certainly as an editor, I will have manuscripts and I will often hear presentations where there's an undue focus on significance rather than the size. And I'll give you an example. Here's a study about transfusion in neonates published many years ago. And here, and I've just expanded these results, and these results are all p-values. There's nothing about the size. I want to know what actually data shows, and it just has p-values. Goodness, who can be writing anything like this? Oops, that's me. But maybe I've learned a few things over the years. So statistical significance, when used alone, is almost meaningless. It doesn't really tell you anything. The truth may be that there's something statistically significant, but the whole truth requires an assessment not only of the significance, but also the size of the difference and whether an a priori hypothesis is being tested. So you have to bear with me for a second with this a priori hypothesis. I'm just going to go to an aside for a moment and comment on confidence intervals. That I and many people will receive the argument that if you're using confidence intervals, everything's okay. You don't have to worry about anything else. So confidence intervals definitely display the range of likely sizes of difference. But it is calculated from the mean, the standard deviation, and the sample size. That's it. You have to put that in. It could be the median but basically it's calculated from other information that we have access to. It provides no additional information and is subject to the same limitations as the p-values. In many ways, if you know someone's height and weight, you can calculate the BMI. If you know the mean and standard deviation and N, you can calculate the confidence intervals. There is no additional information, but it's a handy way of displaying information. Back to the a priori hypothesis. I know, I'm not sure how many of you would have noticed this, but I think other people have. It appears that there's a commonality here of Davids. That there's 3 Davids. There's the president, an ANZCA president, and New Zealand Society of Anaesthetists Davids. But it's alarming when you think that the convener is also David, and that one of the invited speakers is David, and the ASA state chairman is also David. So we could say what the probability is. You can work it out. That is a very, very low probability, but certainly less than P. That would be definitely. So we can make a conclusion here that most anaesthetists in Australia and New Zealand are called David. Well, you may think this is very funny, but unfortunately it's also a little bit sad because a lot of studies will be based on this type of reasoning. And what is the single biggest issue here? What is the problem? The problem is that is not an a priori hypothesis. That is just an observation. You look at it and then you suddenly say, oh, that looks very, very unusual. Make some sort of conclusion, but it's not an a priori, it's a post hoc observation. It might be a very important observation. It might be true, but it needs to be tested. And that's the scientific method. You make an observation, you then form an hypothesis, and then you test it as best possible. But you can get fooled. There'll be a lot of people in this situation who could suddenly say, I wonder what it is about being David that makes you an anaesthetist. And I wonder if people who are called David are better anaesthetists people who are not called David, and they can go on to do all kinds of studies when the initial premise may be wrong. And of course, if you get it into the wrong hands, you could end up with this situation where you could have most anaesthetists are called David. So we have to be careful about an a priori hypothesis versus a post hoc hypothesis. So the role of an a priori hypothesis, as I've said, so you would say most anaesthetists in Australia, that's the hypothesis. The scientific method is you take another sample. So you can't take the same sample, which is another mistake a lot of people make. They will just say, oh, well, we'll go back and we'll use the same data and we'll test it again. But no, you have to have another sample. And then you determine how many are called David and check how likely this is due to chance. And that's what the p-value comes in. It just tells you how likely those are due to chance without it being a real effect. And then you can make your own decisions and depending on your own biases. Okay, but let's get back to our comparison of the Audi, and this is this paper. So you finally find out that the satisfaction was 10% higher with the S4 versus the A4. Great. So now we're in really good shape because we can make an informed decision. But we decided that we wanted it to be for city driving, not for country driving, and we wanted maybe the sample size, maybe the sample had some country drivers. So we asked, was there a difference between city and country drivers? And we reported that there's no difference in satisfaction between city and country drivers. So this is encouraging information. So there's no difference. But let's just think a little bit more about this no difference business. No difference and p greater than 0.05. No difference. This is a pretty strange type of thing to witness. No difference in a biological variable. if you have two samples, no difference is almost extremely unlikely. I won't say it's unprecedented, but it's getting into that type of range where, no two leaves look the same, no two clouds look the same, no two faces look the same, and even if heights and blood pressure, if you measure carefully enough, you're going to find some difference. So the idea that there's no difference is a sort of a concept that we can pretty much dispel. There's not really going to be no difference, especially if you get a whole sample, if you get hundreds of people. Are you really going to find no difference at all between those in some variable or some risk factor or some underlying other factor that could influence this outcome or the variable? So even identical twins. So the idea that there's no difference, I think we can pretty much dispel the idea that there's going to be no difference. In fact, detection of fraud is often based that it's close to no difference. This is what people would think about, and the Carlisle analysis and a number of analyses will be based that it's too unlikely that, and as a result, you suspect fraud if you're getting close to no difference. So no statistically significant difference does not imply no difference. And here we get to the nub of most of the misunderstandings about statistics and probability. So that does not imply no difference. But it's often reported as no difference. We'll hear it's reported as no difference. You'll hear it at this meeting, you'll hear it at any meeting you go to, you'll see it written, and it's very innocently, without any intent to mislead, and then colloquially it's called no difference. Sometimes it's called absolutely no difference. So, we'll say, this is really, really, really amazing. Someone will say, we found absolutely no difference. They found something that has never, ever been discovered before in the whole universe. So absolutely no difference. And they will say it confidently. Well, it's not absolutely no difference. But of course you say, what they mean is there's no clinically important difference. Now, you'll say, we're being pedantic, that we understand that they mean no clinically important difference. But it's not quite so simple. This is very different to no difference. Like no difference means zero difference, everyone agrees. So 0 to me is 0 to you, and 0 to the next person. Everyone around the world will say 0 is 0. Everyone agrees. But not everyone will agree on no clinically important difference, what an clinically important difference is. It might be for me, it might be very small. It might be for a researcher, it might be very, very, very tiny. For a clinician, you want to see a big effect. For people in the third world, you want to have a particular effect. So no clinically important difference varies almost per person to what they would individually think clinically important. It's a subjective number to a certain extent. So when someone says to you, well, there's no clinically important difference, it will immediately spring to your mind, what do they mean when they say no clinically important difference? Is it large or is it small? And you will doubt what they have to say and want to look further. But if they say there's no difference, you'll say, oh, there's zero difference, end of story. So this is not a pedantic issue. This is a quite almost the nub of what, when we are trying to progress our research. And we can go back 400 years, Francis Bacon, and actually about 400 years ago exactly, he wrote about the barriers or the idols, 4 barriers to progress of science, and one of them which is loose language. Others being confirmation bias, truth by authority, and not being able to think outside your current paradigm. But that confusion was pointed out that if we're using, some people are saying no difference mean one thing, and actually they're really meaning no clinically important difference, and well, we may get confused. Now, I'm going to take you through this particular abstract from a paper that's published 400 years after Bacon, in fact last year, and this is entitled Statistical Tests, P-Values, Confidence Intervals and Power, a Guide to Misinterpretations, and it's written by arguably the most eminent medical statisticians in the world currently, one of which is an Australian. And in this, I'll have to read it out for you, but it accompanies a statement by the American Statistics Association about the parlous state of statistical analysis in the medical field, right across. So the misinterpretation and abuse of statistical tests, confidence intervals, and statistical power have been decried for decades, yet remain rampant. A key problem is that there are no interpretations of these concepts that are at once simple, intuitive, correct, and foolproof. Instead, correct use and interpretation of these statistics requires an attention to detail which seems to tax the patience of working scientists. And this high cognitive demand has led to an epidemic of shortcuts, etc., 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 etc. So, quite a damning issue, and then there's a whole stack of recommendations. It goes into like 25 different misinterpretations. Quite impressive. Now, I'd like to challenge the idea that this is high cognitive demand. What is high cognitive demand about this? Reasons for no statistically significant difference. It could be the size of the difference is too small, or the variability in the sample is too high, or sample size is too small. That's it. Is this high cognitive demand? Patient has chest pain. Is it come from the myocardium? Does it come from the esophagus? Or does it come from the chest wall? No, it has to come from the myocardium. Can't think of any other. Well, unfortunately, most multiple regression is based on the number one, and the idea that maybe a factor in your multiple regression model is due to variability or sample size is not taken into consideration. And in many instances, we don't have that. But why not? It's not like it's high cognitive demand. I would contend that this isn't high cognitive demand. This is high school cognitive demand. So many people at the moment will be sitting exams in high school, and they'll be asked to reproduce those three things. And these are just the books that will be taught in high school. You can say, well, I didn't do statistics in high school. Well, why wouldn't you have done statistics in high school? That's because it was too easy, not because it was too hard. You were doing calculus and trigonometry. So it was unlikely, or you may have been doing statistics, but if not, you were doing something much more difficult. And that, I would contend that we should not accept that something as straightforward as some statistical concepts are too hard. This is high cognitive demand. Pathology, biochemistry, microbiology, anatomy, clinical medicine. This is all before we get into our anesthetic training and our primary and our second part. That's high cognitive demand. This is not high cognitive demand, and we should not be hypnotized or some sort of mesmerized into this idea that it's high. We're in some ways our intelligence is being questioned when people say, "Oh, this is too hard for us to do." It's not that hard. So, one of the things is, so how do we choose a sample size? And a lot of people say, "Well, why is this important? The sample size? This is getting very, very pedantic, and let's just leave it to statisticians." Well, I think everyone would agree that in any study, n equals 2 is too small. And of course, n is infinite is ridiculous and impossible. But there has to be something in between. Now, is that just a number we pluck out of the air? Is it totally arbitrary? Or can we do something? Well, as it happens, we can do something, and this has been done for a very long time, and it's very straightforward. And you decide what's the minimum difference you're interested in, what's the variability of the sample. We might get that from a pilot study. You decide, you're in control, what the false positive rate is, and you decide what the false negative rate is, that's the beta error, and then you put it into a calculator, and here we go, put in a difference of 10, which is 80 versus 70, and you've got your alpha and your beta, and the standard deviation, and there you've got 36. This would take 20 seconds. So it's not like it's a difficult issue to get what sample size you need. And then this sample size can give you some firm ground as to what your false positive rate and your false negative rate, and you have that at your fingertips immediately. So, but one thing you will notice immediately if you just play with this particular app or internet site, which of them, with there are many, I just chose that one at random. So for any halving of the minimum difference, the sample size required increases by 4 times. Very, very sensitive to the minimum difference. And any doubling of standard deviation, very, very affected by sample size, and vice versa. So, and to reliably detect a difference of 0, anyone got an idea of what the sample size would be? Well, it would be infinite. So this points out that people who are trying to prove something, that a difference is 0, is pointless. So no statistical significant difference. The truth may be that there is no significant difference, but the whole truth requires a lot more, and it's never true that no statistical significant difference supports no difference. Anyway, we get back to our car, and we find that, yes, there was no statistically significant difference, but the sample size was based on a minimum difference of 20%. And that's larger than the 10% difference that we found earlier. So we can make no inference about difference less than 20%. No inference. We don't know if it is or it isn't or it might be, or basically it's the same as if we've never started. We can make no inference about that. The finding's inconclusive about, and so that number, the minimum difference, is not irrelevant. Okay, so which car should you choose? Well, we know we have low quality evidence, and there's only one study that we've found, and that we're unable to exclude bias to city drivers, and but there's a large quality of level 5 evidence. This is rationale. It has a larger engine. We can't argue about that. It has forward drive. We can't argue about that. So there's a lot, but that is rationale. That is not necessarily driver satisfaction. But wait, one of them costs $118,000 and one of them costs $63,000. And here we have another problem, that much of our research will be based on which of those two cars is better in a certain parameter. Is it driver satisfaction? Is it fuel economy, or is it driver stability or safety? But the questions we want to answer in medicine aren't, is something better, or in a particular a variable, is it also cost effective? And this will be missed. So we always have to and well, maybe, is it risky? Maybe it's better, but it has a higher risk. So we can't just look at it in isolation just because of what is being measured in a particular randomized controlled trial. We have to look at a number of other things. So we have to make a pragmatic decision. And here this is where we lie. So I think we all want to have an evidence-based decision, but eventually we'll have to make a pragmatic decision and on our various biases and preferences and experiences. But of course, it'd be better to practice evidence-based medicine. And here I'm using an example of a car, but you would have many, many examples of clinical decisions that we'd make on a daily basis. So evidence-based medicine, as defined by Sackett, is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. Notice it says best evidence. It doesn't stipulate high-level evidence or whatever. It says best. And it means integrating individual clinical expertise. I mean, if you're not very good at the block, it doesn't apply to you, or you have to become good at the block. And with the best available external clinical evidence, and of course you have to think about patient values, clinical expertise, best research evidence, and I would contend that you have to put in resources as well. It's not unlimited. So are we practicing evidence-based medicine at the moment? Well, we'd like to think so. But let's look at some key issues about which would test this hypothesis about whether we are practicing evidence-based medicine. What about this one? This is a Cochrane review, and I would argue that it's certainly some of the best evidence that you're going to get is going to be a Cochrane review, and this was published in July last year. Physician anaesthetists versus non-physician providers. And here we have some good evidence from which we can apply. This is evidence-based medicine, and let's use it. No definitive statement can be made about the possible superiority of one type of anesthesia care over another. And so it's impossible to have a definitive answer to the review question. Well, I would contend that 7 years post-medical school is a little bit more training than 2 years post-nursing school. And there's many, many other aspects, and I would argue that there's an incredible rationale for physician anaesthetists as opposed to non-physician providers. And in Australia, as it happens, you're not allowed to. In fact, it's illegal for someone to provide anesthesia without medical supervision. So are we practicing evidence-based medicine here? Well, I would say no. What about pulse oximetry? Surely surely there's got to be some evidence for pulse oximetry. These studies confirmed that can detect hypoxemia, but we found no evidence that pulse oximetry affects the outcome of anesthesia for patients. And it just goes on to say it is unclear whether any real benefit was derived from the application of this technology. You've got to be kidding. So here we are practicing evidence-based medicine, but we would very sensibly apply a pulse oximeter, and it's on our safety surgical checklist right around the world, and we'll go to some trouble to make sure that everyone has one. But this is not based on evidence, this is based on rationale. Adrenaline. Is there any evidence that we should be using adrenaline? Apparently not. It says that treatment for anaphylaxis, in the absence of appropriate trials, we recommend it, albeit on the basis of less than optimal evidence. Are we going to stop it because we don't have evidence? No, the idea that we have to practice evidence-based medicine is, we could if we would, but often there's no evidence. We have to make some other decision, and it's based on rationale. And regional versus general anesthesia for cesarean section, this is a little bit older, but again, surely someone's got some sense. There is no evidence from this review to show that RA is superior to GA. So again, we're getting so many situations where we are not being helped to practice evidence-based medicine. Large randomized controlled trials. Well, here, are we going to get the answer? Many systematic reviews, meta-analysis, Cochrane reviews will end up, what we need is a large randomized controlled trial. And yes, we do, we need large rand, but we're not necessarily going to get the answer. We've heard already about the BOS study, which was a fantastic and a groundbreaking study, but the findings not being consistent when followed up by another equally well-performed study, and that's subsequently confirmed by an even larger study. What about nitrous oxide? Enigma 1, Enigma 2. Are we really getting the answers from all large randomized controlled trials? The safety of aprotein was demonstrated in many systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and randomized controlled trials, and it was consensus opinion. This was that it was safe. This is in the mid 2000s, and but later in 2008, the BART trial came out, and shortly after that, aprotein was not only out of favor, it was removed by Bayer. Well, it's back. So it's now available for use in Canada, and it's available for use in Europe. And the whole BART trial data is being questioned. So with the large randomized controlled trials, we can't say, oh, this is going to be solved. We need these, but we need to put them in perspective. And of course, you may all know about this. Hormone therapy cleared after years of doubt that a lot of people have been affected by HRT, and their lives significantly altered by the anxiety related to this. And it's possible that this was unnecessary. I don't know for sure. It's not my field, but it's possibly that it's not. So the truth is our best practice should be based on the best research evidence possible. But the whole truth is that best research evidence may be low quality or quantity and requiring recourses to sound rationale after all. And I would contend much, if not most of our practice is based on a very good rationale and recourse to evidence-based medicine when we can. Even high-level evidence, systematic reviews can be incorrect, and randomized controlled trials can be temporary. New evidence we're going to pursue. We are a living specialty, not a static specialty. We will always be getting, hopefully, new evidence. But when we get new evidence, irrespective of its level, once appraised and scrutinized, it should be added to what we think we know. There's this idea that it should replace what we think we know. No, it should be added to. And in this way, it will allow us to build on the enormous edifice that we've already built in clinical research and anesthesia. Despite all the comments about problems with research, that's because people want to do it well. That's not because they want to stop doing it. And if you just have to look around, and there have been so many examples of wonderful advances and improvements in patient safety, and this is all the result of clinical research. And we have to really pay tribute to our researchers and hold them in high esteem for the work that they're doing. But at the same time, what they find should not replace what we think we know. As if everything before was wrong, it should be added to what we think we know. I think we are familiar with this forcing strategy, stop before you block. I would suggest that when you read journals, you stop before you believe. A stop moment must take place before you believe all you read. I'm going to just go back a little way now and change tack slightly. You might be able to see this, but at the top left-hand corner it says 1984. And in 1984, I published my first paper in anesthesia intensive care. And I thought at the time, I was in awe of the chief editor and the whole process. But I thought at the time, one day I would like to be chief editor of that journal. And you'll see on the top right-hand corner, November 2009, 25 years later, I was very fortunate to be in that position. And it's one that I've cherished very, very much. And I stand down only because all organizations need new ideas. And that's a healthy state to be in. So this is a slide of the front covers of every issue while I've been chief editor. And there's 47 of them. And if I think about it, the amount of work that was done by all the people who published papers, all the authors, and the countless hours and hundreds of hours of work of the authors, and then I think of the work of the reviewers, and I think of the work of the editorial team and my co-editors and the production team. It's an immense contribution to the permanent public record. And I was very, very pleased to be part of that contribution to the permanent public record. You notice I used a picture of myself from 2009 rather than 2017. I like to send a personal letter to everyone, and I like to think I've been polite to everyone. And I've received some rude letters myself, so I've tried to be polite to everyone, but I haven't succeeded. And unfortunately, I've only found out after the fact. Like, this is this letter here, and they're all emails, and this is only found out very late. Thank you for submitting the above manuscript. Your manuscript is well presented and addresses an important topic. However, I regret it has been assessed not suitable for publication in anesthesia intensive care. And I say, uh-oh, I've already sent this, and these guys are from Turkey. I wonder what they'll think about publication. So, oh dear, that's bad. But that wasn't as bad as this one. Thank you for submitting the manuscript. I regret your manuscript has been asked by our reviewers. Not suitable for publication. Oh dear. I don't know what they made of that, but I'm sure I'm never going to get invited to Korea. And, but overall, I've tried to be polite and be encouraging. And I think that I think it's true and say I've never for papers from Australia and New Zealand in particular, I've certainly tried to be nurturing. Our mission in anesthesia intensive care is to be an educational journal for those associated with anesthesia intensive care medicine, pain medicine, and a means by which individuals can inform their colleagues and their research of their research and experience. Now, our mission wasn't to be the highest impact factor journal, and we didn't have other priorities, but this was our priority, and I think that this is what I would like to be judged on, that were we able to complete this mission, and other people will have to be the judge of that. But one thing I do think is that anesthesia intensive care has been very, very encouraging, and I think it even has had a nurturing role to many anaesthetists and intensivists and pain specialists in Australia and New Zealand, and early in their career. And I think that may have been instrumental in their future success because they have been encouraged. And now, on a pro rata or per capita basis, the Australian and New Zealand researchers in this field are amongst the most prolific in the world. I've had another mission over the last few years, and that is to improve the interpretation of anesthesia trials. And this is just an interest directly as a result of what I've been reading, and in many ways to try and help people along with their work, being able to point out that exactly what point that they might be able to improve their submission and get it over the line. And so in 2010, I published this point of view article about formal and informal fallacies, a number of fallacies we could do both clinically and in interpretation of the literature. Like just because a paper is valid, just because a paper is published doesn't mean it's valid, and just the irrational thoughts that can come out of it. And then I've gone on and looked at p-values and the probability of being right and wrong, and beyond effect size consideration, how important this might be to research. And we're looking at the 20 most highly cited papers in the anesthesia literature and finding that some of these maybe hadn't considered this fully. And this was with my colleague, Bill Waitman. And errors in the interpretation of no statistical significant difference, and an audit of statistical validity of clinical trials, again with Bill. And this study I published with my daughter, who's an information specialist and archivist in the UK. And more recently, a forcing strategy to try and improve the evaluation of clinical superiority in anesthesia trials. I'm very pleased to be handing over to a friend and colleague, who's Dr. John Loadsman, who's going to be the new chief editor, and he and his production team and other co-editors, and I'm very happy to continue as an editor under his direction and leadership. And I wish him every success, and the journal every success. So what am I going to be doing? Later in the week, I put on my Hogwarts costume and go off to Oxford University, start my next degree, and try and learn a little bit more about the truth, the whole truth, and evidence-based medicine.
I'd like to congratulate and thank Professor Neville Gibbs for delivering such a wonderful example of logic and clear thinking, tinged with a little bit of humour as well. Neville, you've been an ornament for many, many years to the West and to the specialty of anaesthesia in this country in general, so I congratulate you for that. You'll also be interested to know at Council last Friday, sitting around the table, we actually made reference to and distinguished between the Davids and the non-Davids around the table. There were quite a few. There's still 10 minutes to go, and we turn our focus slightly to the east, so please stay here for the remainder. I'd like to call to the podium a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Simon Macklin, the convener of the 77th National Scientific Congress, which will be held this very time next year in Adelaide. And I hope that all of us, if not most of us, will be able to be there. I draw Simon to the stage.
Welcome to Adelaide, destination for the 2018 National Scientific Congress. My name's Simon Macklin. I'm proud to be the convener of the Congress. Behind me is our venue, the Adelaide Convention Centre. Last month we reopened the third phase of its redevelopment with the new East Complex that follows on from the Central and Western complexes that were completed in the last couple of years. This has turned it into quite a sensational conference destination, and I'm really excited to be in this space for 2018. To the west is the start of Adelaide's biomedical city. The first building you come to is the Health Innovation Building, which opens in 2018. This will hold not only the Centre for Cancer Biology, but also the Museum of Discovery. Next door to that, you come to Adelaide University's new Medical and Dental School. Now this hosts a state-of-the-art simulation centre where many of our emergency workshops will be held. Further on from there is SAMRI, or the Cheese Grater, the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute, The final building to the west, decked out in Port Adelaide colours, is the new Royal Adelaide Hospital. Not only is this Australia's newest hospital, but is also the world's third most expensive building. We hope to arrange tours of the new facility during the course of the conference.
My apologies, that was a little bit loud, wasn't it? Woken you all from your slumber. Thank you, and thank you to the organisers, and thank you to Peter. Our Congress next year is in the safe hands of my scientific convener, Dr. Kate Drummond. She and her team put together a program that I hope will excite you, stimulate you, and refresh you, and make it well worth the trip for you all coming to Adelaide. Our international speakers from the universities of Michigan and Minnesota, Professor Joyce Waugh, Professor of Anesthesiology, who also leads perioperative surgical home in her institution. She's a cardiac anaesthetist, but has a focus on safety, outcomes, and I forget the third one. From the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Professor Lars Eriksson is Professor of Anesthesiology and Intensive Care with an interest in neuromuscular physiology and pharmacology and cognitive outcomes. From the University of Toronto, Associate Professor Daminda Vijay-Sundara, who's been involved in large multinational collaborative studies looking at assessment of fitness for surgery and again on outcomes. Our Australasian speaker will be Professor Lorimer Mosley. Lorimer is a Professor of Physiotherapy and the Foundation Chair of Neurosciences at the University of South Australia. Now, I would suggest that you have a look at him, look him up on YouTube, check out his TED Talk for a taste of what you can get from Lorimer. 2018 marks 100 years since the silencing of the guns on the Western Front that heralded the end of the First World War. It is fitting that we recognise this fact in our logo, where the O of Congress is replaced by the commemorative poppy. And it is also fitting that our Kester Brown oration will be delivered by Surgeon General Air Vice Marshal Tracy Smart. She happens also to be a South Australian girl. What else is there on offer in little old South Australia, I hear you asking yourselves? Well, you can head north to the Flinders Ranges and Wilpena Pound. You can go camping, or you can stay in luxury at Rawnsley Park or Arkaba stations and tap into their guided walking tours, guided four-wheel drive tours, or even a scenic flight over this quite fabulous, stunning, sensational scenery. Head east through the Adelaide Hills. Don't get distracted by the culinary and oenological gems that exist there, and go to the Murray River, where your pace of life will change to the ebb and flow of this mighty river, and stay on a houseboat for a couple of days. Quite magnificent. Head south through the McLaren Vale. You don't need to stop there. And visit the natural sea lion colony, the Australian national treasure on Seal Bay, on Kangaroo Island. You can do some walking, you can visit the remarkable wind erosion rocks at Remarkable Rocks and Admiralty Arch. And again, if you want a bit of luxury, you can stay in the internationally renowned Southern Ocean Lodge. If you don't want to go so far afield, take the tram from the centre. Yeah, we do have a tram in Adelaide. Down to Glenelg, and take advantage of the miles of pristine beaches on the metropolitan coastline. Or head a little bit further north to Henley Square for an al fresco lunch or a latte or just an ice cream. You can head down our cultural boulevard that's North Terrace, go past the museum, the art gallery, the library, and the heritage buildings that exist as part of Adelaide University, Bonython and Elder Halls. If art's your thing, you can head into the Jam Factory, which is just across the road from the convention centre, or keep meandering on down North Terrace to the serenity of the Adelaide Botanical Gardens and this magnificent glass palm house. So there's the jam factory. Head up into the hills, Cleveland Wildlife Park, cuddle a koala, feed the kangaroos. Walk the trail up to Mount Lofty and take in the panoramic views over the city. Take your mountain bike. Cruise the gentle forest trails on Mount Lofty, or if you're more adventurous and like something a little bit gnarlier, you can go into the Eagle Mountain Bike Park, really test your life and limb. For the family, there's loads to do. Go to the Bounce Trampoline Centre, go to Mega Adventure Aerial Obstacle Course, 26 metres high, and test out your nerve. Check out the laneways and the food culture that exists in Adelaide. The convention centre has more bars and hotel beds within 5 minutes walk than at any other conference destination in Australia. We're going to continue the environmental theme, so please remember to bring your satchel because we won't be providing you with one. We all know that anaesthetists drink coffee, and you can buy a Keep cup. I have one here. It's already been used. My apologies. And with deference to Professor Gibbs and to Professor Avidan, there is no science behind this. Each time I fill this up, I get a 50% a 50-cent discount on my cup of coffee. That's the truth. The whole truth is that when I use this 30 times, it's paid for itself. Now, this may not be statistically significant, there's no science and there's no p-value. But I tell you what, I've got 4 children and a caffeine addict. So 50 cents off each time, that is clinically important and hugely relevant to my back pocket. You may have a different perspective, but it's important to me. Head over to Adelaide Oval, take a tour, see the Bradman Museum, do the roof climb. There is loads on offer. Let's just come back to the conference for a moment. We're going to have a family fun day that will run alongside our satellite meetings on Friday. We're going to reintroduce the art exhibition. Now, this used to be a thing of the ASA conferences, and it displays the many and varied artistic talents of our members. So please, regardless of your medium, bring it along, let's put it up on display, and we can all appreciate how good you guys really are. We're moving the gala dinner, and we're putting it on Saturday night, so anybody who's just coming from the weekend doesn't need to miss out on the party. We're going to continue to make our conference more accessible for those people with small children and provide a creche and a family room. And we're going to continue our donations to Lifebox. The conference is the same time next year. That puts it at the end of the school holidays for some of you and the middle of the school holidays for others. So please use the conference as a key to unlock some of the secrets that we have hidden in South Australia. David Law and his team have put on a fantastic conference for us here in Perth. He's set the bar very high, and it's going to be difficult to match their efforts. However, my team, I think, will rise to the challenge. And on behalf of my entire committee, I look forward to welcoming you all in Adelaide at the ASA NSC in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon. It's lovely to see some reference to some seals in some of your slides there. I must say, Adelaide didn't quite take home the cherished prize of the Premiership Cup in 2017, but they've got a much greater prize for 2018, so I urge you all to be there and come. So I'd like to draw now to a conclusion the fourth plenary session of the 2017 National Scientific Congress. So you're welcome to go to morning tea now. It's all done. I do draw your attention though. Hopefully as many of you can be present back in this theatre at 1 o'clock for our AGM. And we'll see you then. Thank you for your attendance, particularly after a wonderful night last night with the Ice and Fire dinner. And I congratulate you all on your stamina and your staying power. So keep going. Thank you very much.